Hey everyone, welcome to Haunted Midnight. I upload true stories every week on my channel, so if you enjoy this video, check out my other videos. Before we begin, over 90% of you are not subscribed. It would be amazing if you guys can subscribe and support me, as I am still a small channel. Thank you for watching. I'll never forget the night the cops showed up at my house, guns drawn and barking orders like I was some kind of dangerous criminal. It felt surreal, like I was watching some action movie but couldn't change the channel. My ex, Emily, had done some wild things before, but this took crazy to a whole new level. Let me back up a bit. When I first met Emily, she seemed perfect. You know, the kind of person you feel lucky to have found, almost too good to be true. She was funny, sharp, gorgeous, and always made me feel like I was the center of the universe. At the time, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. We clicked instantly and got serious fast. Too fast in hindsight. What I didn't know back then was that she wasn't just passionate about me. She was obsessive, and not in a cute way. Things started out small. She'd text me nonstop, even when she knew I was busy at work or out with friends. If I didn't reply within 5 minutes, she'd accuse me of ignoring her or, worse, cheating. At first, I just brushed it off. I thought, she just cares about me a lot, . But then it escalated. She'd show up unannounced at my house, just to surprise me, even though I'd told her I needed space. She'd go through my phone while I was in the shower, then grill me about every female contact, even if it was someone I hadn't talked to in years. But I ignored the red flags because, well, love makes you stupid. We dated for about a year before I finally realized I couldn't take it anymore. She'd turned into a full-time job, constantly needing reassurance, controlling every aspect of my life, and losing her mind any time I so much as glanced at another woman. Breaking up with her wasn't easy, though. She cried, screamed, begged, and even threatened to hurt herself. I almost caved just to get her to stop, but I knew if I stayed, I'd lose myself completely, so I ended it. For a while, I thought that was it. She blocked me on social media and didn't contact me for a few weeks. I thought I was finally free, but no. That's when the real nightmare began. The texts started first. Dozens of them, sometimes hundreds, from random numbers. She'd change her tone depending on the day. One text would say she missed me and couldn't live without me, and the next would accuse me of ruining her life. Then came the packages. She sent me everything from love letters to dead flowers to a box filled with nothing but torn-up photos of us. It was like she couldn't decide whether she wanted me back or wanted to destroy me. And then there were the accidental run-ins. She'd show up at the grocery store when I was there or happened to be, grabbing coffee at the exact time I was. Once, I caught her parked outside my gym, just sitting in her car, staring at the entrance. She always had some excuse. I didn't know you'd be here, right? Because it's totally normal to drive 45 minutes out of your way to buy a single apple from the same grocery store I shop at. The breaking point came one night when I was finally starting to move on. I met someone new, a coworker named Lisa. We weren't serious, just grabbing dinner and getting to know each other. But apparently Emily had gotten wind of it. She must have been stalking my social media or something, because she knew Lisa's name, where she worked, and even what kind of car she drove. She sent me this long, rambling email about how I was betraying her, and how Lisa was a slut who'd ruined my life. I ignored it, thinking she'd eventually lose interest and move on. Big mistake. A few days later, I was at home, minding my own business, when I heard a commotion outside. I looked out the window and saw flashing blue and red lights. My stomach dropped. Before I could even process what was happening, I heard banging on the door and someone shouting for me to come out with my hands up. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it'd burst out of my chest. Turns out Emily had called the police and told them I was armed and dangerous. She claimed I had threatened her life and was planning to hurt myself or someone else. She even went so far as to tell them I had a gun in the house, which, by the way, I didn't. But in today's world, cops don't take chances. They came in full force, weapons drawn, and ready to take me down. I tried to stay calm, but have you ever had multiple guns pointed at you? It's impossible not to freak out. They yelled at me to get on the ground, cuffed me, and started searching my house while I just sat there, terrified and confused. My neighbors were all outside, watching the drama unfold, and I could feel their judgment even through the walls. Of course, they didn't find anything. No gun, no evidence of any kind of crime. After what felt like hours, they'd finally let me go and apologized, saying they'd been acting on a credible tip. I didn't even have to ask who'd made the call, I knew. Emily was the only person who hated me enough to pull something like that. I filed a police report and got a restraining order the next day, but even that didn't stop her. She found other ways to mess with me, sending anonymous letters to my workplace, trying to sabotage my new relationship, even spreading rumors about me online. It was like her entire life revolved around making mine miserable. Eventually, I had to move. It was the only way to get away from her. I changed my number, deleted my social media, and basically disappeared. It wasn't easy, and it felt like I was letting her win in some weird way, but I didn't see any other option. Over time, things quieted down. She must have gotten bored or found someone else to torment, because the harassment stopped, but the damage was already done. Even now, years later, I still find myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see her lurking in the shadows. I don't trust people the way I used to, and every time I start dating someone new, I can't help but wonder if they'll turn out like her. It's like she left this permanent scar on my life, a reminder of how quickly love can turn into something dark and twisted. So yeah, that's the story of how my ex called armed police to my house. It sounds insane, even to me, but I lived it. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that you never really know someone until it's too late. It all started with an Instagram DM, you know the kind, out of the blue, from someone you vaguely remember from high school. Her name was Kara. We weren't even really friends back then, just one of those people who floated around on the edges of my social circle. But hey, she seemed cool enough, and her message was friendly. She said she'd just moved back to town, so I was still here, and thought it'd be nice to catch up. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I'd just gotten out of a relationship that ended with a whimper instead of a bang, and honestly, I was kind of lonely. I figured, why not meet up with an old face? So we grabbed coffee and was fine. Kara was nice, chatty, kind of intense in a way that made you feel like she was *2* invested in the conversation. But again, I chalked it up to her just being friendly. Things escalated quickly after that. Not in a romantic way, at least, not at first. She started texting me a lot, sharing these random memes, telling me long stories about her day, even asking for advice on things I had no business giving advice about, like her family drama or career moves. It was harmless enough, though a bit much for someone I barely knew. I figured she just didn't have many close friends since moving back. I even felt kind of bad for her. That was mistake number one. After a couple of weeks of this, she started pushing for us to hang out more. I said yes once or twice, and we did some low-key stuff, movies, drinks, whatever. But she'd always find a way to extend the night, suggesting we hit up another bar or go to her place and just chill. I started to notice little things though, like how she'd get weirdly quiet if I mentioned other friends, or how her mood would shift if I said I couldn't meet up. It was subtle, but you could feel it in the air, this kind of passive-aggressive tension. I shrugged it off at first. Everyone has their quirks, right? The first real red flag was when she showed up at my place uninvited. It was a random Tuesday night. I told her earlier I was busy with work and couldn't hang out, but she showed up anyway with a six-pack, saying she figured I'd want a break. At first, I thought it was just weird timing, but when I asked how she even knew where I lived, she laughed it off and said she just remembered, from when I'd mentioned my street in passing. I hadn't. That night, I set a boundary, kinda. I told her I wasn't really looking for anything serious, and I didn't have a lot of time for social stuff. She said she understood, apologized for being too much, and promised to back off. For about a week, things were fine. But then the late-night texts started. Long, rambling messages about how lonely she felt, how she wished people would see how much she cared about them. It was emotional whiplash. One night, she'd be thanking me for being such a great friend, and the next, she'd be accusing me of being distant, like I was letting her down somehow. I should have cut ties right there, but guilt kept me tethered. I didn't want to be the bad guy who ditched someone when they were clearly struggling. So I stuck around, trying to keep things casual and balanced. But Kara, she didn't get the memo. One night, I woke up to find my phone blowing up with notifications. She'd tagged me in some weird, cryptic posts on Instagram. Photos of random things like the moon or her shadow. with captions like, "Some people just don't know how much they mean to you until it's too late." She hadn't mentioned me by name, but the tags made it obvious. My friends started asking questions. "What's Kara? Are you two a thing? Dude, what's with those posts?" That's when I started to get genuinely freaked out. I unfollowed her the next day, thinking that it sent a clear message. Instead, it made things worse. She called me that night, crying, begging to know what she'd done wrong. I stayed on the phone for an hour, trying to calm her down, but nothing I said seemed to help. She kept flipping between blaming herself and blaming me, saying I was the only person she could rely on. I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't want asterisk to handle it. And then came the photos. One morning, I woke up to a series of texts from her. They were pictures of me, taken at random times in public places. One was from the gym, another from the grocery store, another from outside a coffee shop I sometimes went to. She hadn't even tried to hide the fact that she'd been following me. I confronted her furious, and she just laughed, like it was some kind of joke. She said she thought I'd find it cute that she cared enough to check in on me. That's when I blocked her, on everything. But it didn't stop. She started emailing me, using different accounts to get around the blocks. At first, the messages were just desperate pleas to talk, but they got darker over time. She accused me of ruining her life, said I'd regret ever pushing her away. One email just said, "You'll see." That was it. No explanation, no context. Just those two words. I started looking over my shoulder everywhere I went. Every time I got a notification, my stomach dropped. The breaking point came about a month later. I came home one evening to find my car vandalized. The windshield was smashed, the tires slashed, and someone had keyed the word LIR into the driver's side door. I knew it was her. Who else would it be? I went to the police, filed a report, but without proof, there wasn't much they could do. They told me to be careful and document everything. Great advice, right? The next day, a package showed up at my door. No return address. Inside was a framed photo of me, taken from my Instagram, and a handwritten note that just said, "This could have been perfect." I moved out of my apartment that weekend. I haven't seen Kara since, but every so often, I'll get a friend request from some random, untraceable account. No photo, no bio, just a blank profile. I never accept them, but I can't help wondering if it's her, still lurking, waiting for an opening. So yeah, that's the story of my crazy ex, except she wasn't even really an ex, just someone who spiraled way too deep, way too fast. It's been a couple of years now, but I still catch myself looking over my shoulder, checking my locks twice before bed. It's not paranoia if it's justified, right? You ever have that moment where you look back on something and wonder how the hell you didn't see the red flags? Like, maybe they weren't even red flags at first. Maybe they were just those tiny annoyances or quirks that you shrugged off. And then, before you know it, those quirks have snowballed into something straight out of a nightmare. That's how it was with Melissa. I met her through a mutual friend. She had that kind of energy that could light up a room. Charismatic, funny, quick with a comeback. She wasn't someone you could easily ignore, and I think that's what drew me to her. I was fresh off a breakup and figured, why not? Melissa seemed fun, and for a while she was. We had that honeymoon phase where everything feels perfect, and you convince yourself that maybe this time it'll be different. Spoiler, it wasn't. Things started to shift a couple of months in. Nothing huge at first, just little things that didn't sit right. Like how'd she get mad if I didn't text back immediately, or how she always wanted to know where I was and who I was with. She'd brush it off as caring, and I guess I let myself believe that. I even thought it was kind of flattering, in a messed up way, that someone wanted me that much. Looking back, I can't believe how blind I was. The first real sign that something was wrong happened about 6 months into the relationship. I was out with friends, just grabbing a beer, when she showed up uninvited. She said she just happened to be in the area, but the look in her eyes told a different story. She wasn't there to hang out. She was there to make sure I wasn't doing something I shouldn't be. She didn't even try to hide her irritation when one of my female friends said hi. It was embarrassing, but I laughed it off, made excuses for her. She's just protective, I told myself. She's had a rough past. Things only escalated from there. Melissa had this habit of blowing up my phone if I didn't respond fast enough. If I didn't pick up her calls, she'd start sending these long, guilt-trippy texts about how she just wanted to make sure I was okay, or how she was worried I didn't love her anymore. It was exhausting, but I felt trapped. Every time I tried to bring it up, she'd turn on the waterworks, and I'd feel like the biggest jerk in the world. By the time we hit the 1-year mark, I knew I had to get out. Melissa wasn't just clingy anymore, she was controlling. She wanted to know passwords, who I was texting, where I was going, and why I wasn't spending more time with her. It felt like I couldn't breathe. The final straw was when she went through my phone while I was asleep. She didn't even try to deny it when I confronted her. She just said, "If you have nothing to hide, why does it matter?" That's when I started planning how to break things off. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. Melissa had a way of making everything about her, turning every argument into a pity party where she was the victim. I didn't want to deal with the drama, but I also didn't want to stay in a relationship that was suffocating me. So I waited for what I thought was the right time, which, let me tell you, doesn't exist when you're dealing with someone like her. When I finally ended things, it was a disaster. I tried to keep it as calm and straightforward as possible, but Melissa wasn't having it. She screamed, cried, begged me to reconsider, and when I didn't budge, she flipped the switch. She started accusing me of cheating, of leading her on, of wasting her time. It was brutal, but I stuck to my guns. I thought, okay, this is the worst of it. She'll hate me for a while, but eventually she'll move on. I couldn't have been more wrong. The text started almost immediately. At first, they were just sad, desperate pleas to talk, to work things out. Then they got angrier. She'd accuse me of ruining her life, of being a heartless bastard. It was like she was cycling through every emotion on the spectrum, trying to find the one that would get me to respond. I blocked her number, but she just found other ways to reach me: email, fake social media accounts, even handwritten letters shoved in my mailbox. I didn't feel safe in my own home. One night, about a month after the breakup, she showed up at my place. I don't even know how she got in. It was a locked apartment building, but there she was, pounding on my door. She looked off. Her hair was a mess, her eyes were wild, and she had this manic energy that made my skin crawl. I told her to leave, that I'd call the cops if she didn't, but she didn't move. She just stood there, saying over and over how I couldn't do this to her, how I owed her. I should have called the police right then and there, and I didn't. I thought if I could just stay calm, I could de-escalate the situation. Big mistake. The next thing I knew, she was inside. I don't even remember how she got past me, but suddenly, she was in my kitchen, grabbing a knife from the block. I froze. It felt like everything was moving in slow motion, like I was watching a scene from a movie I couldn't stop. She didn't say anything. She just lunged at me. I managed to block the first swing, but she was relentless. I felt this sharp, burning pain in my side, and that's when I realized she'd actually stabbed me. It wasn't deep, thank God, but it was enough to knock me out of my shock. I grabbed her wrist, twisted the knife out of her hand, and shoved her away. Then I ran. I didn't even think to grab my phone. I just bolted out the door and banged on my neighbor's door until they let me in and called 911. Melissa was gone by the time the cops showed up. They found her a few hours later, hiding out at a friend's place. She got arrested, and I got a restraining order. The whole thing feels surreal, even now. Sometimes I look at the scar on my side and wonder how close I came to something worse. I've had my fair share of bad relationships, but nothing like this. So yeah, that's the story of how my ex stabbed me. Not exactly a tale I thought I'd ever be telling, but here we are. Life's funny like that, huh? Or maybe not funny, just messed up. Alright, let's dive in. You know how they say some breakups are like a clean cut. Quick, maybe a little painful, but ultimately you just slap a band-aid on it and move on. Well, my breakup with Emily wasn't like that. It was messy, drawn out, and by the end of it, I wasn't just bleeding. I was questioning if I'd ever recover. She didn't just want to end things, she wanted to burn my life to the ground while she walked away, laughing. We dated for about 8 months. Nothing crazy, not the love of my life, but for a while, it felt like things were good. She was funny, ambitious, a little dramatic, but in a way I chalked up to passion. The red flags were there from the start, but I ignored them. Like how she'd get weirdly jealous if I so much as mentioned another woman's name, or how she seemed to know a little too much about my schedule, even when I didn't tell her. At the time, I shrugged it off. Maybe I thought I could handle it, or maybe I was just too dumb to see what was coming. The relationship started to go downhill when I realized how controlling she was. She wanted to know where I was all the time, like every minute of the day. If I didn't text back fast enough, she'd accuse me of ignoring her or, worse, cheating. I'd go out with friends and come back to these long, dramatic texts about how I didn't care about her or how she was so afraid of being abandoned. It was exhausting, but I kept making excuses for her. She's just insecure, I told myself. She'll get better if I reassure her. Spoiler, she didn't. When I finally decided to end things, I tried to do it as gently as possible. I told her we weren't working out, that we wanted different things, and I thought it was best for both of us to move on. She cried, a lot. She begged me to reconsider, promised she'd change, but I stayed firm. I thought that was the hard part, but oh man, I had no idea what was coming. At first, it was just a lot of texting. She'd send me these long paragraphs about how much she loved me, how she couldn't believe I was giving up on us. When I didn't respond, the messages turned bitter. She called me every name in the book, accused me of stringing her along, even hinted that she was going to make me regret it. I figured she was just venting and ignored it. People say crazy stuff when they're upset, right? Then the rumors started. It was a Saturday morning when I got the first text from a friend. Dude, what's going on? Are you okay? I had no idea what he was talking about until he sent me a screenshot. It was a Facebook post from Emily. This long, dramatic story about how I'd been arrested for domestic abuse. She wrote that I'd been violent throughout our relationship, that she finally found the courage to leave me, and that the police had taken me into custody after I'd attacked her. She even tagged me in the post. My first reaction was disbelief. It was so outlandish, so completely fabricated, that I thought no one would take it seriously. But then more messages started rolling in. Texts, DMs, even emails. Some people were checking in on me, but others weren't so kind. I got called a monster, a coward, a waste of space. Friends I hadn't talked to in years were messaging me, asking what the hell was going on. I tried to do damage control, explaining to anyone who'd listen that it was all a lie. But the thing about rumors is that they spread fast, and by the time you're done explaining yourself to one person, 10 more have already heard the twisted version. It didn't help that Emily was doubling down, responding to anyone who questioned her with more lies. She claimed she had evidence, but of course, never showed anything. The worst part was my job. Someone, I wonder who, sent an email to my boss with a link to her post. Suddenly, I was sitting in HR, trying to explain that no, I wasn't a criminal, and no, I hadn't abused anyone. I could tell they didn't fully believe me, but since there wasn't any actual proof, I got to keep my job. Still, the whispers around the office didn't stop. People looked at me differently, like they were waiting for me to slip up and reveal the truth. For weeks, it felt like my entire life was under attack. Emily wasn't content with just the Facebook post. She started messaging my friends and family directly, telling them I was dangerous and manipulative. She even created fake accounts to comment on my social media, posting things like, "How dare you show your face after what you did?" It was like she was everywhere, this shadow that I couldn't escape. I thought about going to the police, but what was I supposed to say? Hi, my ex is lying about me on the internet. It felt pointless. I did talk to a lawyer, though, and they helped me draft a cease and desist letter. I sent it to her, hoping it would scare her into stopping. For a little while, it seemed to work. The post came down, the messages stopped, and I started to feel like I could breathe again. But Emily wasn't done. A few weeks later, someone sent me a link to a blog she'd created. It was like a shrine to our relationship, filled with these wild stories about how I'd ruined her life. She wrote that I was a narcissist, that I'd gaslit her, that I'd manipulated her into staying with me. None of it was true, but it didn't matter. People ate it up. She even started selling resources for other women to spot the signs of abuse. I couldn't believe it. By this point, I was completely drained. My mental health was in the gutter, and I barely left my apartment unless I absolutely had to. I felt like I was constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next attack. I stopped using social media entirely, deleted half my contacts, and even considered moving to a new city just to start over. Eventually, things died down. Maybe she got bored, or maybe she found a new target. I don't know. Every so often, I'd hear a rumor about her trash-talking me to someone new, but it never gained the traction her original lies did. I slowly started rebuilding my life, but the damage was done. Some people still believe her, and honestly, I've given up trying to change their minds. So yeah, That's the story of how my ex tried to destroy me. Not with violence or threats, but with words. It's amazing how much power someone can have when they know how to manipulate the right people. I wish I could say I learned some profound lesson from all of this, but honestly, I just learned to keep my guard up. You ever look back on a breakup and just feel relief, like you dodged a bullet? I don't mean the kind where you just drift apart or things fade naturally. I'm talking about the ones where halfway through, you realize, go, this person is insane asterisk. That's how it was with Sarah. And if I'd known how far she'd go to mess with me after we broke up, I'd have ended things a lot sooner. We met at a party through a mutual friend. She was the kind of person who made you feel like you were the only one in the room when she talked to you. Charismatic, sharp, a little over the top, but in a way that made her fun. I just moved back to my hometown, living with my dad temporarily while getting back on my feet, and Sarah was this whirlwind of energy that felt like a distraction I needed. Things escalated fast, like meet my family fast. She loved that my dad was single and joked about how she could totally be his cool daughter-in-law. It felt harmless at the time. In hindsight, it wasn't. The relationship wasn't all bad, but it definitely had cracks. She was jealous in this way that felt performative, like she enjoyed the drama. She'd pick fights over things like me liking an old friend's Instagram post or not texting her back within 5 minutes. At first, I just thought she was passionate, intense, sure, but I could handle it. I didn't realize how much she loved control until I tried to pull away. After about 6 months, I started to feel smothered. She wanted to be involved in every part of my life, from my job to my family to my hobbies. I couldn't go anywhere without her needing to know who I was with and why she wasn't invited. She even started showing up unannounced at my dad's house, using some flimsy excuse about dropping off coffee or wanting to see me just for a minute. My dad thought it was funny at first, but even he started to raise an eyebrow when she let herself into the house while I was at work because she felt like hanging out. When I finally broke things off, she did not take it well. She cried, she yelled. She threw out every guilt trip in the book. She even tried the whole "you'll never find someone like me" routine, which, frankly, sounded more like a promise than a threat. I thought she'd blow off some steam and then leave me alone. I underestimated her. The first week after the breakup was quiet. Too quiet, honestly. I thought maybe she'd moved on. But then my dad called me one evening, laughing nervously. He told me Sarah had shown up at his work with a coffee and a bag of cookies, saying she wanted to check in on him. At first, he figured she was just being friendly, but then she started asking him questions, personal questions. Stuff like, "Are you seeing anyone?" and "What's your type?" He said it felt off, like she was fishing for something, but he didn't want to be rude, so he just brushed it off. I was mortified. Who does that? I called Sarah and told her to knock it off, but she didn't answer. Instead, she posted some cryptic stuff on Instagram about how some people don't appreciate the effort you make. And real love is about finding the right connection. I ignored it, hoping she'd lose interest, but she didn't. The next time she showed up, it was at my dad's house. I wasn't there, thank God, but my dad called me, sounding genuinely uncomfortable. He said she'd come over with wine, saying she wanted to talk about me and how she thought he deserved to know the truth about our breakup. My dad, blessed him, tried to steer the conversation toward more neutral ground, but she kept bringing it back to him. She told him she thought he was so kind and mature, and that she admired how he'd raised me all by himself. My dad's not a clueless guy. He knew exactly what she was doing and told her, as politely as possible, to leave. That should have been the end of it, but no. Sarah doubled down. She started texting my dad directly, sending him memes about single parenting, inspirational quotes about finding love later in life, and even selfies of her at random places, like the gym or coffee shop. She played it off as casual, but it was clear what she was doing. My dad, to his credit, shut her down every time, but she didn't seem to care. It was like she saw him as her new way to get under my skin. The tipping point came when Sarah invited my dad to dinner. She called it a thank you for all the times he'd been so supportive during our relationship, which was laughable because they'd barely interacted beyond a few awkward conversations. My dad told her no, of course, but she showed up at his house that evening anyway, dressed like she was going to a 5-star restaurant. He called me while she was there, whispering into the phone, what do I do?" I told him to kick her out, and eventually, he managed to get her to leave. After that, My dad stopped being polite. He blocked her number, and I followed suit. Sarah wasn't dumb, though. She started posting these weird stories on social media, implying that she and my dad had some kind of connection. She'd write stuff like, "Sometimes the best relationships come from the most unexpected places," or "Age is just a number when it's real." People started messaging me, asking if it was true, if Sarah was actually dating my dad. It was humiliating. I finally had enough and sent her a message through a mutual friend, telling her to knock it off or I'd get a restraining order. That seemed to do the trick. At least, she stopped bothering my dad. But the damage was done. For months, I couldn't shake the feeling of paranoia, like she was waiting for the next opportunity to mess with me. Even now, years later, I'll hear her name pop up in conversation, and my stomach drops. So yeah, that's the story of my crazy ex who tried to date my dad. It's funny now, in a messed up way, but at the time, it was anything but. People say breakups bring out the worst in some people, but Sarah, she took it to a whole new level. Sometimes I wonder if she even really liked me, or if I was just the warm-up for whatever game she thought she was playing. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed this video, check out the video on screen.